Historical Commission meeting, March 20th. Just a reminder, I think we are live streaming. Anybody on the live stream, those comments won't be acknowledged or responded to. And reminder to us up here, we'll use the mics when we can, and for you folks down there as well. So item number 1, approval of the minutes from the February 21st meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Motion passes. Item number 2 on the agenda is conceptual discussion for 232 North Prince Street. So you guys are already up here. If you want to introduce yourselves and then go through your presentation.
Sure. My name is Dana Clark. Thanks. And with me is Ben Lesher.
Ben Lesher with Parcel B Development Company.
So we're going to walk you through the presentation we put together tonight with regards to the property at 232 North Prince. The first photo, I think the cat's already out of the bag. We've taken a hard look at the 2 historic buildings that front Prince Street. Those are identified in orange. And we've sort of come to the conclusion that those are sort of an integral part of the redevelopment of the site. That's sort of the cat out of the bag. We'll walk you through how we arrived at that conclusion. You'll see the remainder of the sites in yellow. That represents the areas that will be selectively removed from the existing structures to make way for the proposed new structure.
So I just wanted, just from a high level, kind of talk about the project and what we're proposing to do. So we're calling this project 232 Prince, and as Dana said, it's at 232 North Prince Street. Kind of 3 things I wanted to highlight tonight. So we're proposing to build a mid-rise apartment building, looking at 130 units. When I approach new development opportunities, I'm looking to maximize density in housing units for a variety of reasons. One of those is to respond to the need for housing in the city right now and help relieve some of the rising housing costs that the city's facing. The second thing, in particular to this project, is to do a lot of smaller units. We're looking at studios, 1 beds, 2 beds, even some micro units, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And a lot of that comes out of some of the recent housing studies that were done, which showed a mismatch between the city has a high share of 1- and 2-person households, but the housing stock has a higher share of multi-bedroom units. And so again, here we're responding to that need. And then we're also trying to look at some innovative ways to provide a new housing product, hopefully a little more economical, and that's through the micro units. We're also exploring ways that they could not just be for residential living, but maybe some live-work units. And as you'll see through the plans, we're actually looking at kind of a storefront facade for some of those, and actually entry off Prince Street, which would allow for some more kind of studio space or retail. You could display things of that nature. So kind of excited, not exactly sure where that space will go or what those users will look like, but wanted to try to offer something new. The second kind of really, I'd say nice or interesting feature about this site is Pocket Park or Central Courtyard that we have in the middle of the site, and we'll get into that more. But it really just offers a nice green space for residents to enjoy, both from looking out from their apartment, but also enjoy as an amenity space. It also helps break up some of the facade, especially along Water Street, and just softens that and gives some nice we'll have some nice plantings and trees and things of that nature in there. Provide some nice relief from the structures. And then lastly, of course, like Dana was already starting to get into, we're looking at integrating both old and new buildings. Of course, we want to respect the architecture and character that makes Lancaster such a special place to live and work and visit. but we also want to try to bring something new and fresh and kind of elevate the built environment with some new structures as well. And to do this, we're planning to reuse some of the more historic structures, and those will provide some kind of unique living spaces, but also kind of preserve that historic facade that we're used to walking by every day. So anyway, with that, I'll hand it back over to Dana, and they'll take it from here.
Thanks, Ben. So we start out every project in a similar fashion. What we're looking at here is the overall density of this neighborhood. Really commercially driven at this point. We're going to get into the history of it, and we'll see that it always wasn't that way. You can see the residential to the west. But this site is a very dense site. It's almost completely improved. There's a few areas of landscaping, but they're a token at best. But you can see that all the adjacent blocks are really dense, which is another reason we thought sort of the integration of that courtyard or that pocket park that Ben alluded to might help soften this. So what we did here was we zoomed in both on the pochade site plan as well as an aerial, and we're looking at, in this case, you can see in orange on the slide to my left, those are the two sort of historic buildings that we're sort of keyed into at this point. And then you can see on the right, in that aerial, a lot of the footprints of the buildings within that block occupy that whole stretch of ground between North Prince and Water. The aerial sort of shows that better than the pochade, because the pochade does not give the sense of what's parking and what's building. So these were some of the overhead studies that we were looking at to understand the scale of the buildings in the area. So this is the existing survey of our site, and it is seven distinct buildings. The earliest dates before 1897, and then there were renovations up through the mid to late 1980s when Benjamin Roberts took over the site for their office renovation, warehouse, and showroom. So the site has evolved quite a bit in its history. We'll go through some of that here tonight. It's been a very dynamic site, not only in the buildings that have been on the site, but the uses that the site has seen historically. So 1886 is the first Sanborn that we found that addresses this site. And at this point, you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the, right there. So that building is what we believe to be the 3.5-story building to the south of the site. It was identified as a hotel or a saloon. It was residential in nature. You can see the entire block and surrounding area is really, at this point in time, still very residential in nature. And then you can see in the upper corner, what is that, the northwest corner, there was a small building there that was a drugstore. Actually, it remained a drugstore until like 1963. That was the one building on the site that remained fairly consistent in size and in use. The larger building on the site is the Miniature Hall, which is, I didn't realize this, it's a social club. Social club was founded in like 1867. It's still in existence today. I think there's a hall in Harrisburg. So that occupied a large portion of the Water Street elevation. We'll get into a photo later. In the history, there's a thought that building burnt down circa 1930s and was reconstructed. The maps don't really tell that story. That was sort of in a written review of an interview with one of the previous property owners. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. But as you can see, site's fairly undeveloped. This section right here was labeled as a beer garden. So I think, it fit nicely with the hotel, saloon, and the social club. That seemed to make sense. So, but again, very, very residential in nature at this point in time. So then we jump ahead to 1897. So in 1897, you can see this is the hotel building that was there originally. Then they built what we believe to be the 2-story addition that you see remnants of today. Obviously, that The first floor of that building has been altered over the years, I think most recently in that mid-1980s work when Benjamin Roberts moved in. You can see there's been a small addition to the drugstore up in this corner. And even at this point, you can see that the Mentor Hall was losing its popularity, or that social club was losing its popularity. They converted a portion of that building to storage. We feel like the two-story addition that is on Prince Street now is likely additional residential space for the hotel, but that's an assumption based on what we can see and what we can surmise from the maps. Again, the block's still really residential in nature, not very dense yet at this point, as we saw in the opening site plans. That density is going to come a little bit later. So 1932, you can see that density coming. I think a lot of that has to do with the proximity of the rail on both sides, on Water and the Pennsylvania Railroad to the east. You also see the introduction of automobiles, and you can see the character of the neighborhood is really evolving into what I call heavy commercial or light industrial. You know, you've got concrete and tile, you've got lumber yards, you've got auto sales are starting to creep up. Interestingly enough, the lot on the corner, you can see between the last Sanborn map and 1932, those residential structures were all torn down, and what was built on there was an auto showroom, which is essentially the building you have there now. On our site, you can see we're starting to infill all the open area that was the beer garden, and it's all changing character again. It's gone from the social club and the hotel, and it's gone to uses that have really emphasized the fact that we're now working in the automobile era, or the start of the automobile era by 1932. There's 2 garages, and the social club and everything else is gone. We've got auto sales in the front. A private garage was built behind the drugstore, and you can see the whole block is starting to get denser. You can see the biggest impact on the block was the Hearn Company building to the south, the PCAD site today. You can see how large and big that building footprint is, and the impact that it has on the site and how you perceive the site. You can see all these buildings are starting to take up that entire swath between Prince and Water. If you guys have any questions, just stop me, please. So then we jump ahead to 1951. Again, you can see we've got another change. We've got another complete change in use. So the automobile uses have fallen to the wayside. You can see to the north, we've got the paint, wallpaper, and glass, which some of you may remember. Our site, again, more infill construction occurs, and the uses change again. We go to a bottling works, a dry cleaner, a rug cleaner. The drugstore, as I said, is still there. And we're starting to see a little bit of residential use return to what we believe are the 2 Prince Street structures. We believe that's where we're seeing some residential use resurface again. The private garage is still there, as is the Hearn Company warehouse to the south. So interesting enough, that Hearn and Company warehouse as you can see, is a big building. I mean, that's a 6-story building with a massive footprint. So it really made an impact on the character of that block when it was built. So then you can get into that here. You can see our site, which is circled in the bottom of this slide. This is 1930s. Sometimes it's easier to see an aerial view than it is to look at the Sanborns. You can see the large buildings to the south, which are the Hearn Company. You can see sort of the rectilinear configuration of all these buildings where they have the narrow face on Prince Street and a long building that traverses the distance between Prince and Water and makes up the roughly 1-story difference in grade. You can see in this structure too, the one at the very bottom, sort of the gambrel roof, that could be the hall, the social club, or it could be the one that was reconstructed after the purported fire in 1930. And then you can see all the infill pieces that existed that we saw in the Sanborns between that structure and the 2 sort of signature structures that are along Prince Street. And then you can obviously see there's other historic landmarks on here just to give you context, but I think everyone's aware of those. But you begin to see the scale of the buildings in the 30s and how they relate to the block and the fabric of the block and how they're perceived by pedestrians on Prince Street and Water Street. So then I said this area started residentially in nature. So this is it. I mean, this is across the street, and it begins to give you a sense of how residential this block really was. This is the relay house. And then we can see that same structure, and we can start to see, the introduction of the automobile, and we can start to see the larger scale buildings that are filling that lot when it transitions from a fully residential neighborhood into something that is that heavy commercial or light industrial. And we can see the scale of those buildings are 4.5, for their time, a good sized structure. And then we can see that was one of the automobile uses. That building was also set up for auto industry, which we said really dominated that block in the 1930s and 40s. And then you can sort of see the untimely demise of this guy. Any questions about the sort of brief history of the site and how the site's evolved and how we've gotten to today's context? Okay. So you're all familiar likely with the current streetscape. So this represents, on the top slide, you'll see the entire, from PCAD to Our Town Brewery, that represents the entire block. You can see the Hearn Company warehouses to the south and what was the auto dealership to the north. And then you can see the two existing structures that we're identifying as sort of key elements of the redevelopment. And then you can see sort of the 1980s. It seems to have a postmodern influence to it, but everyone's familiar with the site. It is memorable. So you go down to Water Street. This is important because, again, there is that change in elevation between Prince and Water, and you can see how it impacts the scale of the buildings as you look at them from a pedestrian perspective on Water. You can see our sites in both the top and the lower slide have been identified sort of to make it easy for you guys to follow along. So then, just to bring you in closer, just as a refresher to get reacquainted with the specifics of the site, the top two slides are that Prince Street elevation, where we can see what was the hotel saloon on the left-hand side, right here. We can see the addition that accompanied that, and then we can see these infill pieces, which this is likely that private garage that we were looking at that was built behind the drugstore, if we can surmise that. And then this is sort of the infill piece that was constructed during that 1980s renovation where Benjamin Roberts took it over. It was, I think, K&W Tires prior to Benjamin Roberts. I think K&W Tires was there until the late 70s. Lower two slides represent the pedestrian view from Water Street from this same site. You can see the backside of the hotel saloon, let's call it that. You can see remnants of the backside of it here, and then you can see the additions that have been added. That all these different buildings add to that sort of 7-building total that I've been using as a placeholder to represent how many different structures exist on the site currently. And then we have this piece here, and then the addition that connected all that here. So just in looking quickly at the existing elevations, we started, you start with the basic, you start with the existing conditions and what was there. You can see here the extent of the hotel and what we believe to be additional hotel space. Clearly, this work was done during the 1980s. Based on the drawings we have, this work on the first floor was done during Benjamin Roberts' rehabilitation of the site. So we know that that's not historically correct. It's been a real challenge to find something that really captures that specific section. We know that there was a little bit of work done to this building also during that 1980s renovations. But generally, we feel like that building is fairly true to its original character. And then we talked about this sort of postmodern piece that connects the two, and then this, likely that private garage. From the Water Street side, again, you can see all of this stuff was added on in different fits and starts. This is obviously the back side of that hotel structure, and then here, there's a little bit of an addition here, and then again, you can see it picks up here. Really pleasant space. The second floor of that space was surprisingly pleasant. If you've never been up in there, the first time that Ben took me up, it was kind of like, one of the reasons that it was like, this feels like a good building to use as part of the project. Site section, I think we've talked a number of times about the difference in grade that exists between North Prince and Water. This is a section through the site where you can see that one-story addition, and then in the back you can see that second floor piece, and then further down you get the third story of what was the hotel saloon. So that's kind of the quick synopsis of what's there, what we were using as study guides and study principles as we sort of put together the next steps. The next study we did was we said, okay, standing on the site, what is the context of scale and massing? Obviously a focus of the group, both our group and yours. So we said, okay, let's identify what we see. So in this particular slide, looking south, we've identified 5 major buildings that have a scale, a significant scale, slightly higher than what is the typical 4 to 5 that we see. Number 1, I think you guys all know these projects, but we'll run through them quickly. Queen Street Garage, parking garage, 6 stories. 2, the Holiday Inn reads as 9. The Lancaster County Government Center reads as 7. That's number 3 here. Number 4, Prince Street parking garage, that reads as 6. And then the last is PCAD, reads also as 6. The other thing that we noted when we looked at these slides was how dense the footprint of all those structures is. And I think that makes an impact on the perception, not only from an aerial view, but from a pedestrian view. And they're somewhat a little bit different than sort of the traditional tobacco warehouses, with the exception of maybe this guy, but where you have that narrow face on the main street and then it utilizes the full depth of the block. So then we did the same drill and we looked to the north. And we said, okay, what can we see that is similar in scale to the north? So number 1 was the 317 North condominiums. That reads as 5 stories. Lancaster Press project reads as 6 stories. That's got a heavy footprint as well. Number 3 is the Lancaster House North Apartments. That actually reads as 13 stories. And then Ruoff Towers number 4, that reads as 11. Part of what makes that successful in our review of it was there's a lot of space between the street, at least on Prince, and that building. So there is that court that sort of mimics or reduces the scale of that, minimizes the scale of that building. And then you can see our site here. So then, after we sort of took a look at the scale and context of the buildings within the neighborhood, we said, okay, what are the rhythms of the facades and the streetscapes? So we looked both at North Prince and at North Water, and hopefully yours reads better. It doesn't read as well up here. We've identified on the North Prince Street some of the shaded elevations with a corresponding rhythm, and we used that study and those rhythms to sort of identify how our building fits within the context of those rhythms. We did that same drill along Water Street, where we sort of look at the PCAD buildings and our buildings. They sort of were bookends to the block, is sort of the way we were looking at them. So the cat's out of the bag with regards to what we're proposing, but I think some of the elevations don't do the building as much justice as some of the later images will. So we're gonna run through. We're gonna talk a little bit about the footprint, and then we're gonna talk about the courtyard and pocket park that Ben is really pushing. So one of the things you can see Obviously, these are footprints of the two existing structures along Prince Street. What we've done was we said, okay, we're going to maintain those structures, and then we're going to take the approach to sort of take that traditional sort of tobacco warehouse rectilinear shape, put the narrow face towards Water and Prince, and then that gives us the ability to sort of lighten the density within the footprint of this site, and it also gives us an opportunity to do something with a park, or if not a park, a courtyard for the enjoyment of the people not only living there, but the people using Water Street. We don't have that park fully designed, but we provided, on the right-hand side, you can see sort of the two images that we used that sort of are similar in character and nature to what we're looking at for that area. And then we've got, again, because we want to take advantage of making each view from every apartment appealing. Not only did we take the trouble to go in here with some planting in a court, we want to introduce a court up here and as much as we can down here as well. So that's the sort of the general footprint. We'll get into the specifics of what occurs on each floor in a couple of later slides, but really this slide is to depict how we were treating, you know, the footprint, the overall footprint of the structure and the opportunities that that footprint affords us for the court. Any questions so far? I'll just keep going if not. Sure. So I told you we get into the specifics of each floor plan. So we've given you where we are today with regards to the floor plan. We are proposing covered parking, screen covered parking to the south here. This sort of garden court here. And then here, we're proposing lower level ground floor apartments. These are some of the apartments that fit into that total count. Other amenities, so what we're thinking is the Water Street garage is here, and there's parking here. So we imagine that this will be sort of the residential entry, or if you're driving to the site, this might be how you experience the site. So the thought was if you're parking in Water Street, you cross the street, you would go through the courtyard, and you'd enter the building here. If you're parking and you have space here, you'd enter here. But the idea was to make an experiential, somewhat of an experiential journey from the parking at Water Street through the courtyard into the space. At the lower level, we also have amenities for, we've got the fitness center, we've got a dog washing area. Since I understand that's an amenity these days, right? Got to have that. See, Steve knows. I was unaware that that was a have to have, but Ben corrected me. So we have that. We have covered bike storage here. We anticipate outside bike parking as well, but we do have covered bike storage here, and then we have tenant storage. And then we have the units to the north. What we're proposing here is we're going to maintain sort of what was the grocer's alley or the baker's alley. It won't be covered. We're going to pull the building back from our neighbor, but it sort of has that feel where we're going to use that for, on the first floor we'll see for package delivery, and then access that way. And then the lower side of that, where we make the transition in grade, you can see the stairs here. We transition in grade between Prince and Water. That's sort of the courtyard, sort of cloister area that we were showing in the site plan. So the people on the north side in those units will have a nice, at least a small sort of courtyard to experience in an urban environment, which I think is a nice takeaway. And then you can see we're going to use the existing basement of the historic structure. That is where most of our utilities come in currently. We see that continuing to function as a primary utility area for the new project. So then we get to that first floor, and we'll start over here where we have that sort of that grocer's alley with access to the parcel room. We've got a new piece, a new infill here. This is the piece that fronts north Prince. And then we've got the longer leg, sort of the L piece, as you will, if you will, of that back here. We've got a small transition structure that's in here that navigates the language between the historic structure and the proposed structure to the north. Then we get into this existing structure, the historic structure that fronts Prince Street, that's two-story. This is where we get into some of the I don't want to call it experimental, but at some level it's experimental housing that Ben alluded to earlier. It's live work, it's shared workspace, it's remote workspace. It could be any number of uses, and we're hoping we can figure out. I think there's a need for it, and I don't think there exists the market. There's shared workspace, but this is small enough that maybe you don't need to do the shared workspace. You can have a private workspace. There have been a number of different scenarios that we've kicked around as a team, but we thought it seemed appropriate to have the option to have a little storefront and the ability to live and work out of that same space or work remotely. So that's sort of the experimental pieces, that those micro units that Ben was alluding to in the introduction. This piece, which was the hotel saloon, that's quite a nice, the way we've laid it out, the way Ben and I have looked at it as a team, is we think that could be a really nice one-story unit. It would have entrance from Prince Street. It would also have an amenity entrance from the back, so that they would have access to all the same amenities that occurred in the lobby. Those amenities include a thing like a coffee bar, the lounge, the fireplace, the receptionist, the package, the mail. They could come out, in essence, their back door, go through the connecting hallway into the lobby, but they would also maintain that sort of traditional entrance on Prince Street, where you'd come in, you'd have the vestibule, a very traditional approach for city living. And then this would be built behind that historic saloon or hotel, and this would be that sort of rear L that occurs to the south. And again, apartments on both sides of a double-loaded corridor. The other amenity that we've added on this level is we've got this sort of Prince Street level terrace. So the terrace in the back side gives outdoor space for everybody to use, and it also gives a view of the court below. So then let's jump up to a representative of 2 through 5. So again, second floor, still the existing structure here and here. The hallway runs on the back side of that existing structure. To just give you some context, this is the back of that existing structure right here. And then we pick up our new construction here. This is a 2-story apartment that is the second and third floor of what was the hotel. Interesting thing, if you've never been in that building, the other sort of takeaway that I got from it was that stair, the historic stair, exists between 2 and 3. So the amazing part about this, which I only found out this week, is, unless you want to tell the story. So apparently when K&W was there, they stored tires on the upper floors, and they used to roll and heave the tires down that stair. Surprisingly, that stair is mostly intact. Now, granted, there are a lot of holes in the wall at the bottom of the stairs, but nonetheless, I was taken by the fact that it has survived. And I think because it has survived this long, we thought it would be good to incorporate that stair, what remains of that stair, into a unit. So that unit would be a 2-story unit. That's that unit right here. This unit would also be sort of a 2-story piece as well. A little bit. So the unit was divided when you go up. If you go up in there, it was divided with a central core, and there was a big room on this side and a big room on this side. Pretty traditional organizational structure for that. Again, second floor, that's that really nice space that I was taken by when I first visited the site and I had an opportunity to tour it. Again, this is that infill piece that translates between the new structure and the historic. And then we have the 2 L's on the back side that front Water Street. So that occurs from floors 2 through 5. Obviously, we'll get into the differences when we leave the historic structure, but once you get to 4, obviously this transitions back to the roof that you've seen. Our goal was to pull the building back so that we didn't impact the way that the pedestrian perceives that building from the street. So this point is really the new structure for the L that fronts water. This is specifically the 6th floor. The other thing that we did to sort of keep the scale in line with that 2-story, when we overbuilt the 2-story, we pulled the overbuild back so it wasn't in the same plane as the Prince Street facade of the historic structure, And then as it got taller, we pulled it back even further. That gave us the opportunity to create a terrace that overlooks Prince Street. I know you and I went back and forth about, it's sort of reminiscent of a porch, although not exactly, but I think it gives a different view than a rooftop. It's sort of a little bit more engaged with the street, which is something we thought was nice, was a nice feature that a lot of buildings don't have the opportunity to do. It helped us in two regards. It helped keep that scale of the overbuild, it lessened the impact of that scale, and it also gave us the opportunity to create that sort of sky porch, for lack of a better word. And then you can see the remainder of this floor is all new construction in order to get to our 6 floors. 6 floors from Prince, 7 from water because of the change in grade. So we have that ground floor and 6 stories above. So roof plan, at this point, it's primarily mechanical in nature. You can see the historic structures in the top right. In roof plan, stair tower access, but it's primarily units. We toyed with the idea of something on the roof with regards to amenity space, but we ultimately opted for the terrace that overlooked the courtyard at the Prince Street elevation and the one on Prince Street that overlooks the street. So I think one of the things that the roof is doing, which is sort of unique for our project, is we are collecting all the rainwater on the roof, and we are storing it on site in essentially glorified cisterns, and we're using that water. That's not only part of our architectural design, but a part of our stormwater strategy. So we wanted to do something. The stormwater is getting more difficult to manage, and we wanted to come up with a solution that maybe could be implemented more widely. Ben was game for taking a look at this, and we feel like we're headed down a good direction. It may solve a bunch of problems for our development and potentially others. So this is sort of the Revit model. So you'll see, we'll get into this. This is sort of flat and sort of a little bit more lifeless than I'd like it to be, but it does give you the sense of to the north. So this is the structure to the north. We are thinking in masonry, construction, brick to be determined. The color, we're looking at a couple of different options there. At this point, we are considering likely standard modular. It could go thin brick, but I think at this point, we're leaning towards modular brick here. This is this sort of glass. One of the things that we took away from this, before I jump into the next piece, the windows we're looking at are double hung in configuration, so they would complement sort of the historic nature. They don't mimic that, but they're complementary to that. We tried to introduce subtly, sort of the arch that would have been traditional for the historic structures at the street level. And then, sort of the brick piers that exist here as separators, kind of typical construction for a building of this period, of that historical period. Our next piece was sort of the glass infill that exists to sort of navigate the ground between the new infill to the north and the historic structures. Again, we're looking at this as a primarily transparent facade. We think it really makes for really wonderful units because you've got a lot of glass and you've got a lot of natural light. It also helps to transition between the masonry structure and the new masonry structure and the historic. We're looking at a number of different possibilities for how that may manifest itself from either large double hungs. We could look at storefront. We haven't gotten that far yet. So we'd be interested to hear takes on that. This is the overbuild. Again, this overbuild we talked a little bit about has been pushed back from the facade of the Prince Street. And then you can see this is even further back because that is that Prince Street sort of sky porch that we talked about before. So it really helps bring that scale down. These two pieces, the historic in context storefronts are that experimental unit that we talked about. So Could those be small storefronts? We are just a block up from Gallery Row, so could it be that? Sure. Could it be someone that just wants a small office? Sure. If they're fitted with a Murphy bed, could you do both? Sure. So again, we feel like there's a need, particularly with everyone working, a lot of people still working remotely. We felt like there may be an opportunity here that's sort of not realized yet, and I think Ben was willing to take a flyer on this and see how this works. Lastly, this piece again is back behind the rear wall of what was the hotel, what we're calling the Hotel Saloon building to the south. This piece is also set back from the facade. We wanted a canopy over the entry door, and we wanted to be cognizant of sort of the new guidelines that the city's sort of implementing with regards to obstructions in the right-of-way. So it helped on two regards. It satisfied that, and it also gave some relief to the Prince Street elevation. So Water Street. So this, in this rendering or the sketch, you can see we've got the infill, the L addition, let's call it, which we're thinking is primarily a stucco or stucco-like material and metal panel. So that would be here. So we're thinking stucco material here, metal panel here. This is that courtyard. So this will be planted, and this would be that Prince Street sort of porch terrace that we talked about. This facade will be restored. This piece, what we're thinking in this piece is either a natural or a synthetic slate. Not an unusual detail in the city where you see the upper levels in a slate cladding. That's what we're proposing for this piece. And then the L, we're going to mirror that L on the south side. We've got the screen parking here at the lowest ground level, stucco-like material here, metal panel, and then this is obviously the stair tower for access to the roof. You can see here, this is the edge of the Hotel Saloon building on Prince Street, and the chimney, that sticks out. That goes all the way to the property line, again, where this building is pulled in from the property line on both the north and south lot lines. And then you can see here at the lowest level, to take advantage of the courtyard that we're creating, we've opened up all of those amenity spaces with a view out to that court. We've tried to maintain, again, we're looking at a combination of mold double hungs on these facades as well, or a pair of double hungs. I think the idea is, we can get the size and the scale, but we can sort of do it with double hungs. So we get the light that we want within the units, but we do it in a slightly more traditional fashion. So let's take a look at the north elevation. This is standing in the courtyard looking to the north. Again, we've got stucco material on the lower portion of it, and then we have the projected bays. The projected bays, again, a typical city feature on a lot of residential homes. We are proposing the natural or synthetic slate on those projected bays to help break up the material, the stucco material. We can see the terrace here, the Prince Street terrace here, and its relationship to the elevation at Prince. And then again, we're looking at likely a metal panel up on the upper floors, and then this is the elevator penthouse. The south elevation is essentially a mirror, almost a mirror image of what it was looking north. The difference is we've got the screen parking here. The screening, while it also screens the parking, also will act as a dog run or a dog park. So we're trying to do two things with one architectural feature. Again, we've got in here, this is that Prince Street terrace, and you can see this is sort of that sky porch that we're calling it here that overlooks the street. Again, slate, natural or synthetic slate, bay windows, box windows here, stucco material in between, and a metal panel on the upper floors. So we did a little rendering to suggest how this reads better, because it's more helpful than the flat elevations. So you get to see the scale relative to the block. Contextually, it seems to be a nice anchor. It seems to be that bookend piece to PCAD to the south. And you can see this piece here. We've maintained separation between this building and this building as well. That creates a porch for one of the units because we've created that separation to maintain sort of the integrity of that structure. This is the two-story in here, and we have more pictures of this. I know you guys, I put the trees in because that's really how you're going to perceive it, but for the purposes of this, we'll show it without those as well. This is that sort of that sky porch up here. Again, that transition building, that sort of transparent, translucent building that navigates the language between the new infill and the historic structures. And then this is the new masonry infill here. That piece finishes with a corner here, steps back, and then this is where we pick up the L that goes back to Water Street. So then that Water Street facade. And then this is probably, at this point, likely one of the areas where the cistern's going to be to collect that rainwater. That's why those stair towers sort of project out. I think at this point, the thought is both of those stair towers, or a portion of those, will be acting as the collection point for that rainwater. So we've got, and then you can see here, we start to get into how those storefronts may manifest themselves. The new potential storefronts manifest themselves on Prince Street. This maintains the sort of that residential character that it's always seemed to have. And then these pick up these sort of experimental units. It's likely there may have been, if you looked at the Sanborn evolution, it's likely that there may have been some commercial nature in that building over the course of time. The changes, again, were dynamic on the site. So, again, we just really haven't found any documentation. So this is almost that same view, but so now we're into sort of a more crude Revit model, but it does give the board a chance to look at massing and scale. So you can see the view looking south on North Prince. This building obviously is sort of the outlier. It feels pretty good with the rest of the block. Obviously, this building is a little bit jarring because it is sort of a different character than a lot of the buildings on the block. But it's a nice, the elevation, I think, works well with this view. Again, we've got the masonry structure here. You can see the relationship of this facade as it's pulled back from the historic structure here. And then we capture all of that corner and that roof because we've pulled this structure away from what is the historic hotel to give it a little breathing room and to create some amenity space for those adjacent units. So this is the view, obviously at the south looking north. So this starts to give you some sense of those other sort of steps that we were talking about. Again, historic structure here, the L that starts on the back side of the structure and extends to water. This is the hallway that connects. This is the hallway that overlooks a terrace that connects this L to this L and to the elevator lobby. Again, we've got sort of the glass piece here, entry canopy, entrance, the masonry anchor here, and then the representation of what is some sort of historic storefront for this structure in those experimental units. Let's flip to Water Street. So looking south, as a pedestrian on Water Street, this is sort of your view. So you've got structures, sort of that U-shaped structure with the courtyard here, screening for the parking here, and then you can work your way down. You can see PCAD anchoring the block on the south end. And then obviously we've got Water Street garage here. Let's turn around, look north. You begin to see the scale of the garage relative to the new structure. Again, orientation, screened parking, courtyard. That's the one story on the corner. And then PCAD obviously is to the south of this slide. We try to break down this scale as well. We change materials to sort of keep that scale a little bit more in line with the rest of sort of the lower scale buildings immediately to the north and the south. This backs away. You get a better sense of how this might read. You're more like standing on the parking deck at this point. But it gives you a sense of how this reads. You got the projected bays. Again, you start to see that here. The screen parking here. The break of the structure to go to that, that 4 or 5 story feel with then the context of an overbuild above it. And again, this is the backside of the Prince Street masonry structure, and then again, the stair tower acting as our water collection and egress, obviously. So I think this is our last slide. This is turning around, looking north, and you can see, again, upper level, screen parking, court. But you can see it in context to PCAD and some of the other buildings on the site. So that's the sum total of what we wanted to at least give to you. And I guess at this point, I'd like to hear your thoughts and suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions or comments or commendations, whatever?
I just had one question. On the front facade, I guess it would be the south tower, there's a lot less windows on that facade and on the step back portion. Is that just because of the floor plan or?
You're here, right?
Yeah.
Danielle? Yes, at this point, it works with the floor plan. I think I didn't want to, I guess the other thought was I didn't want to overwhelm. I wanted that more like a blank canvas for the historic structure, so I didn't want to overwhelm it with too many windows, but at the same time, I wanted to make the units pleasant, so we were trying to work the program of the units with sort of a lesser window amount. That was sort of at least the thought process.
Okay. Other questions?
I'm not sure how I feel about the overbuild over the 2-story section. You're adding 4 stories on top of an existing 2-story structure. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I guess I'll start over. Yeah, I'm a little concerned about the overbuild of 4 stories on top of a 2-story structure. Seems a bit overwhelming. I appreciate that you've set it back.
I don't disagree. I think for us, it goes back to sort of Ben's overview of some of his bigger principles. I mean, obviously, our goal is to get some density for these housing, so he can make sense of it, so we can spend the time and devote funds to the restoration of the 2 historic structures.
How many apartments are on each floor of that section of the building?
Let's go back, and then we can talk about it specifically. So we talked about the micro units at the first. There's 2 apartments. There's 2 apartments in that second floor of the historic structure. So those are really both pleasant apartments, given the amount of windows that existing structure had. And that would be true as you go up as well.
So if you got rid of that overbuild, or if you flipped, instead of overbuilding, if you flipped it to the other side of the corridor, to the west side of the corridor, you'd still have the same number of units and you wouldn't be building over the historic building.
So you're suggesting you want to build over the first floor terrace is what your idea is?
Yeah. And then maybe the roof of the historic building becomes your porch or roof terrace. That way you could, if not keep all of keep your unit count, you're limiting the reduction of the unit count.
Right. I think the only problem is we lose the 2 units in the corner as well.
The windows in the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have to be.
So it's really those units also.
Yeah.
Not only use the 246 there, but we're going to lose.
You might, lose, part of the corner units. The other thing that I'd ask you maybe to look at is, I think from an elevation, the
Where do you want to go, Steve? Here?
look, keep going to the rear, the Water Street side.
You want the further
Yeah.
out?
I think that elevation is more successful than the Prince Street elevation, because it's just more clean and fewer materials. The Prince Street elevation is just kind of a jumble of too many different things. So maybe if that overbuild weren't stucco, maybe if it was all the metal panel so that it recedes more, maybe that's
Yeah,
way to-
my first comment was going to be, I think the material of that overbuild being stucco is probably not the right choice.
yeah.
And I appreciate your comments about it being 4 stories over 2 stories. It's really 3 with another one set back. It's still,
Yeah.
but I think, yeah, that additional material there, while it's useful on the rear or in the inside of the U, may not be as successful there on
Yeah.
the street side.
Yeah, I think it might just be too many, it's too many different masses and too many different materials, and it's just kind of a, for want of a better word, a jumbled mess.
Fair enough.
To me, the rear elevation is much more successful. It's,
But using the glass tower to separate existing from new
I
is
think
fairly
that's, I think that's
successful.
fine, and I like the way that you pulled it back from the
Right.
historic 3-story section so that you can preserve the cornice and you can preserve the hip roof.
So the biggest concern right now is how this piece reads.
Yeah.
If I'm reading you guys.
I mean, it does
correctly.
read better in 3D.
It
because
does.
you have set it back. But it's still, because it's kind of standing out like a beacon because it's so, it's the material is so much brighter than the rest than the brick and I'm assuming the brick of the new addition to the north is going to be a brown brick or a gray brick, or not the red brick
Correct.
of
Yeah.
the historic building.
Correct. We don't want to compete with that brick. It's,
Yeah. And the other comment I had is when I was looking at this before this evening, I saw those new storefronts. I was like, what's going on there? Because they're not historic storefronts. They weren't in the historic photograph that was in the packet. So I think you just want to be careful about not, that if you're going to introduce a new element like that, that it be compatible with the historic character of the building, but not try to mimic a historic storefront.
Yeah, I
Make it
think-
clearly of the 21st century.
Yeah, I think we tried to strip down. We tried to give the proportions of what that might be without any of that historic articulation.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of our thought as a starting point anyway.
Yeah.
It seems like you're headed down that same path.
Yeah.
And you're right that
I'm just thinking of the things that like the Park Service beats over my head.
Yes.
When we submit a
Yeah,
tax
we have
credit
that
project.
same lump on the back of our head.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's all good.
I appreciate
agree.
the challenge of because
Yeah.
Benjamin Roberts has gone over the front of it.
They messed it up.
So you
Yeah,
have to
it's-
kind of find something.
But even the old historic photograph that you had, I don't think you had it tonight, but it was in the packet that we received
Oh.
Okay.
earlier. The fenestration was always kind of wonky. They didn't have first floor windows lining up with second floor windows. It was just kind of.
I don't have a good.
Yeah.
I wish I had better images, but
But I have a feeling that photograph was altered with a 19th century version of Photoshop. Because if you look at it, that flag is not real.
Oh yeah, that
That
flag
flag
isn't.
was
It's
drawn in.
waving very nicely. It's
Yeah.
not real.
So there's some,
They're the same.
and there's like a little Belvedere on that building that I don't know that was ever there.
I think there was a Belvedere.
Or is it maybe a building behind that we're seeing?
There may have been one on the hotel.
Yeah. But
Oh, it was on the shorter
on
building.
the shorter building, yeah.
I don't
with
have
the
that
flag-
image
with
right
the
in front of
flag
me,
on
so-
top. But then there's there's a telephone pole, or what looks like a telephone pole in the front of the building that just gets cut off at the roof line. So like,
That is a nice flag, I have to say.
It was from a Board of Trade publication, so of course they would have photoshopped
Oh, they
it.
did something. Okay.
yeah, so like it's got two flags that don't look quite right.
No, they don't. The other thing that I think we were responding to is in one of our initial meetings with the city, I know there was
Oh, just wanting to see kind of more of a commercial storefront.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing on this. If they're all if it's all residential, and it's a missed opportunity, I think.
Well, I did look into the zoning ordinance to see if the residential was in fact allowed, but you're in CB,
Yep.
so you're cool.
Well, I'm glad we reached the same conclusion, Steve.
What's that?
I said, I'm glad we reached the same conclusion.
Yeah. If this were CB1, those
You're out,
first
yes.
floor apartments would be
Correct. And again, that's why we were looking to do this almost a hybrid at some level,
Yeah,
where we
that's
still
intriguing.
respect that
that could be
could be.
commercial.
Correct.
And I that makes sense to me now, because when I saw those little shop fronts, I'm like, what are you doing there?
Fair enough.
But yeah, it makes
We've asked ourselves this.
it makes sense now. Yeah, I think overall, I think it's a nice solution. I think it just needs some, kind of
We agree.
refining.
And that's why we thought this was the time to reach out to this board and get your thoughts, because, we felt like we were on potentially a path for a successful project, but, we needed your way in.
Yeah, I didn't realize how, you kind of, you're familiar with the building on the Prince Street side. Didn't realize how much really developable land was on that site, that property, from the backside.
Correct.
Just one story, garages and warehouses and things.
It might be nice to see a site section or something of Prince Street comparing, these additions with the buildings across the street. It's not readily, the Revit model's got actually, I'm not even sure the Revit model had some blocks that we saw that were
On the other side.
apparent. I
don't
think it would be
know.
nice to show that comparison so that, if you're walking or driving down Prince Street, this building is this and this building is this. That would be helpful to see.
You're definitely taller than the buildings
Yeah, for
across
sure.
the street.
I
Yeah,
don't think
the-
that's unreasonable, but it'd just be nice to get the full feel of the corridor.
I think the tallest building is that sort of 4.5-story tobacco that's right down from the corner. I think that's probably the tallest
And
on that side. And then obviously the police station is not on the street, but
yeah, well, police station's 4 stories, but the
it has
floor
a
to
tall,
floor it has tall floor to floor.
yeah.
Nice thing too is you've got the parking garage behind you, so you're not blocking anyone's view.
Correct.
With which is
And even if there were people behind us, I think that center court is an opportunity that a lot of developers wouldn't use or wouldn't take advantage of. So because of the entry from that point, and just being cognizant of of having that thing so massive, it just didn't read very well.
well, you almost need that courtyard just to get the natural light into the apartments.
Also true.
If that was all filled in,
Yeah, where are you
what
going
would
to
you
go?
have?
Yeah.
Other comments or questions about this? Recommendations for when they want to come back? Nothing. Are there any comments from the public or questions? Okay. Do you need have any other specific questions for us about, things that you were debating or other concerns?
So I think you've addressed a lot of them, and I think Steve, your comments are spot on. We knew that with regards to the Prince Street elevation and how to maintain that 2-story building, maintain some of its integrity, and yet get the counts to work for us. So I appreciate that comment, and I think, we can look at ways, certainly materially, we can look at ways to make that less of a thumb. And I think in general, the material palette, seems like everyone on the board's comfortable with the material palette, be it stucco, metal, slate, and brick. Those seem to be compatible materials with what we're trying to do and the existing
Yeah,
fabric
that's
here.
fine. Yeah.
The other, and you addressed the Water Street elevation. I wanted to make sure, obviously with the bigger L pieces along Water Street, I wanted to make sure we broke those down sufficiently, and I think the court and it helps navigate that. So you addressed that.
Like I said, I think the the Water Street elevation is more successful.
you,
It's
works
kind of
better.
For me, it is,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just kind of more simple and elegant
Fair enough.
than the front.
Anything else you got?
No.
That was sort of
Thanks.
those were the primary, I wanted to get in touch on scale, materials, all the things that you
Yeah.
would expect. And we've talked about all of them, so I appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Anything else?
And just for scale, I mean, these windows are reading as floor to ceiling.
They're,
So,
yeah, they're,
okay.
we're trying to get as much light in there as possible, and given the height of the building and the scale seemed
Yeah.
appropriate. And
Okay.
again, it was two birds with one stone. It got us apartments that are somewhat unique in the scale of those windows, and obviously the more natural light is preaching to the choir.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great project.
Great, thank you, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and the other items on our agenda, any other business? Any other comments from the public? Okay, I guess we don't need anybody at the council meeting, Suzanne. Then I'm wishing to adjourn. If there's no objections, we'll adjourn 7:07. Thanks, everyone.